A tomato plant in a soundproof laboratory in Tel Aviv started screaming, not in a way any human could hear, not in any frequency that registers in the human ear, but it was screaming loudly and rapidly, at 40 to 80,000 cycles per second, sending out bursts of ultrasonic clicks that a nearby moth could detect from several feet away. The scientists in the room heard absolutely nothing, but the machine did. And what artificial intelligence decoded from that signal is one of the most disturbing things researchers have uncovered about the living world around us. Because the plants were not just making noise, they were communicating. And once AI learned how to translate what they were saying, what it found out about the relationship between plants and human beings changed everything. This is not a story about fictional talking trees from a fantasy film. This is peer-reviewed science published in academic journals, real experiments with real numbers. And the picture those numbers paint of the world we live in is going to be very hard to forget. For centuries, we built our entire understanding of the natural world on one comfortable assumption. Plants are passive. They sit in soil. They absorb sunlight. They grow. They do not feel, do not respond, do not communicate, and they certainly do not notice us. We walked through forests without a second thought. We mowed our lawns on Saturday mornings and trimmed our hedges without any awareness that we might be doing something that could be registered, recorded, or reacted to by the living organisms surrounding us. We planted, harvested, cleared, and burned the plant kingdom with complete confidence that our actions moved in one direction only. We shaped plants. Plants did not shape us. We were completely wrong. And it took an artificial intelligence system to finally pull that assumption apart and show us what was actually happening around us the entire time. The discovery that opened this entire field came from Tel Aviv University, published in a peer-reviewed scientific journal, and it sent immediate shockwaves through the biological sciences community worldwide. Researchers placed tomato plants, tobacco plants, wheat, cactus, and several other species inside a specially designed acoustic container in an isolated soundproofed room. The microphones they used were no ordinary recording devices. They were ultrasonic detectors capable of capturing frequencies far beyond the 20 kilohertz ceiling of human hearing. And then the researchers waited. At first, there was nothing unusual, but the moment they stopped watering the plants and allowed drought stress to build, the silence broke apart entirely. The plants started clicking, rapid structured bursts of ultrasonic sound, each click a distinct pulse carrying specific encoded information about the plant's internal condition. A thirsty tomato plant was producing these sounds at a rate of up to 40 per hour. A plant that had been physically cut with scissors produced a completely different acoustic pattern. The researchers then fed all of that sound data into an artificial intelligence system trained on machine learning. The AI analyzed the patterns, learned the structural differences between different stress types, and was tested on recordings it had never seen before. It achieved 84% accuracy. The machine could listen to a plant and tell you whether it was thirsty or experiencing physical pain. 8 times out of 10, it was correct, and that is not a number that can be explained by chance. That single finding should stop everything, because it means plant sounds carry information, structured, encoded, repeating information about the plant's internal state, information that has been broadcasting into the air around every living creature on Earth for millions of years, at volumes roughly comparable to ordinary human conversation, in a frequency range that we simply lacked the biological equipment to detect. We were not missing background noise. We were missing an entire living language that has been running continuously all around us since long before our species first appeared. And the only thing that finally made it audible was a machine learning algorithm trained by human beings who, even then, were surprised by what they heard. In July 2025, the same Tel Aviv University research group published a follow-up study that moved into entirely new scientific territory. They confirmed for the first time in recorded history that animals respond directly and deliberately to plant sounds. The experiment focused on female moths. When given a choice between a stressed plant emitting rapid ultrasonic distress clicks and a healthy plant sitting in complete silence, the moths consistently chose to lay their eggs on the quiet plant. They were listening to the plants. They were making life decisions, decisions about where to place the next generation of their offspring based on acoustic signals produced by plant tissue. The study was published in the journal eLife. Researchers described it as the first scientific evidence of direct acoustic interaction between plants and animals, and it confirmed something with enormous ecological implications. The plant kingdom has been embedded in a functioning communication relationship with the animal world for an incomprehensible period of time. Insects, bats, small mammals, and potentially dozens of other species have been navigating their environments partly by listening to information that plants were continuously broadcasting. We were the only participants in the living world who had been completely deaf to it. Scientists had known for several decades that trees are connected through underground fungal networks. These mycorrhizal networks, formed by fungi that wrap around and penetrate tree root systems, extend through the soil in threads almost too thin to see individually, yet so numerous that a single teaspoon of healthy forest soil contains miles of them compressed into an invisible web of biological fiber. The popular name for this system is the Wood Wide Web. For a long time, the dominant story about it was one of cooperation and generosity. Mother trees sharing carbon with struggling young seedlings, forest communities sustaining their weakest members through a quiet underground system of mutual support running across entire ecosystems. That story was not entirely wrong. But when artificial intelligence was given access to the full data flowing through these fungal threads, it revealed that the cooperative narrative had been capturing only half of the picture and leaving out the half that changes everything. When a tree in a connected forest network is attacked by insects, it does not sit passively and absorb the damage. Within hours, it begins pushing specific defensive chemical compounds, including jasmonic acid and methyl jasmonate, through its root system and into the shared fungal network. AI tracking these signals with unprecedented timing precision found that trees hundreds of feet away from the original attack site were beginning to produce their own defensive enzymes before a single insect reached them. The warning had arrived underground first. Research on leguminous plants confirmed that when one plant suffered an aphid infestation, its connected neighbors began emitting volatile compounds within 6 hours that attracted the natural predators of those aphids. The plants were not just defending themselves, they were calling in biological reinforcements. The forest was functioning as a single coordinated defensive organism, with the fungal network as its communication system and chemical signals as its language. But artificial intelligence also found what the cooperative narrative had quietly overlooked. Certain tree species, with the black walnut being the most thoroughly documented example, use the same underground network not to help neighbors, but to destroy competitors. They release allelopathic compounds through their roots that spread through fungal threads and suppress the growth of competing plant species in their surrounding territory. They are essentially poisoning rivals through the same biological channels that other species use to share resources and send warnings. AI pattern analysis showed that this is not a random chemical side effect. The distribution of these toxic compounds targets competing species, while leaving symbiotic fungal partners largely unaffected. The Wood Wide Web is simultaneously a resource-sharing network, a biological alarm system, and a chemical weapons delivery system, running all three functions at the same time through the same underground channels. The forest, at the root level, is a place of deep interconnection, rapid information exchange, and calculated territorial aggression, all happening in total darkness beneath every step we take through any piece of ground that has trees growing on it. In 2024, researcher Yu Fukasawa at Tohoku University watched fungal mycelium grow across a laboratory floor where wood blocks had been arranged in geometric patterns. The mycelium did not spread uniformly across the available space the way a basic biological growth model would predict. It reached towards specific blocks, prioritized certain connections, and left others completely untouched. Fukasawa's published conclusion in the journal Fungal Ecology was that the network was demonstrating something that functioned as decision-making and memory. No brain, no neurons, no central processing organ of any kind, just a distributed biological network making choices, and doing so with a sophistication that made researchers stop and think very carefully about what the word intelligence actually means. And then came the research that made scientists personally and directly uncomfortable in a way that underground fungal warfare had not quite managed. A 5-year investigation running from 2020 to 2025, conducted by researchers associated with MIT, the University of Cologne, and collaborating institutions across Europe, asked a question that most mainstream biologists had previously considered too unlikely to study seriously. Do plants respond to specific individual human beings, not to humans in general, not simply to warmth, movement, or carbon dioxide output as generic environmental signals, to specific people, distinguishable from one another as individuals? The research team attached custom-built bioelectric sensors to plant stems and leaves and recorded the electrical voltages produced by the plants in real time across extended periods of different people interacting with the same plants. A deep learning artificial intelligence processed all of that bioelectric signal data. The results were published in peer-reviewed journals, and the findings were unambiguous. Plants generated distinct and measurable bioelectric signals that correlated with specific individuals. The machine learning classification system achieved 66% accuracy in identifying which particular person was near the plant based solely on what the plant's electrical activity was doing. At chance level, that score would be 50% or lower. The gap is statistically significant and reproducible. A follow-up study used a ResNet 50 deep learning architecture, converting plant bioelectric data into visual spectrograms and training the network to classify human emotional states based purely on the plant's electrical response. This system achieved 97% accuracy in reading human emotional states through the plant's bioelectric output. The plants were not just detecting who was standing near them. They were tracking how that person felt at a level of accuracy that exceeded most human ability to read emotion in other people. In November 2025, an independent study published in the journal Biomimetics provided additional confirmation. Machine learning reliably distinguished between plant bioelectric recordings made when a human being was moving in the vicinity and recordings made in an empty room. The plant was registering human presence through shifts in its own electrical activity, and doing so before any physical contact was made. The researchers who conducted the 5-year investigation proposed that this sensitivity represents an evolved early warning system. Plants have shared their environment with large herbivorous animals for hundreds of millions of years. Detecting the approach of something capable of eating or damaging you before it physically arrives would provide a real survival advantage. The bioelectric field changes associated with the movement and proximity of a large mammal appear to be exactly the class of environmental signal that plant sensory systems evolved to detect and respond to. Every time you walk through your garden, the garden is registering your presence, not through any process we would recognize as thought or consciousness, but in a measurable, electrical, scientifically documented way that artificial intelligence has now confirmed beyond any reasonable doubt. Now consider what this collection of findings means when combined with what AI is uncovering about plants at the planetary scale. Almost a third of the world's population currently suffers from pollen-related respiratory allergies. A 2025 study published in the journal eClinical Medicine documented the accelerating global scale of this health crisis. The World Health Organization projects that by 2050, more than half of all people alive on Earth could be affected by some form of allergy. The pollen season across North America has already extended by as much as 3 weeks compared to historical baselines. Airborne pollen concentrations have risen by more than 40% over the past 2 decades. Climate change and elevated atmospheric carbon dioxide are the primary drivers, causing plants to flower earlier in the year and produce greater volumes of pollen across longer seasons. But AI systems analyzing pollen chemistry at geographic scale have identified something within this data that extends beyond the simple volume explanation. The protein structures found in pollen produced by plants under high environmental stress are measurably different from pollen produced by unstressed plants. Stressed plants generate pollen with modified protein profiles that are more irritating to mammalian respiratory systems. And when AI analyzes the geographic distribution of pollen chemical profiles, the most chemically aggressive pollen is concentrated in precisely the areas where human pressure on plant communities is most intense. Deforestation boundary zones, industrial pollution corridors, urban expansion edges where wild plant communities are being compressed, disrupted, and chemically stressed by the relentless advance of human development. A deep learning AI system developed at the University of Texas at Arlington in 2025, capable of distinguishing pollen from closely related conifer species at an accuracy level that was previously impossible for any human researcher, is now being deployed to track how pollen protein profiles shift as environmental conditions change. What it is revealing is that plants under the greatest human pressure are producing the airborne compounds most damaging to human airways. Whether that pattern represents a biological response to stress or simply a chemical consequence of cellular damage does not change what is landing in your lungs every time you breathe outside during pollen season. When you place all of these findings beside each other, the picture that assembles itself is genuinely difficult to absorb. Plants produce structured ultrasonic distress signals that carry specific encoded information, and animals make critical survival decisions based on those signals. Trees coordinate active defenses across entire forest networks through underground fungal channels that simultaneously run cooperative and competitive chemical programs. The fungal networks themselves demonstrate decision-making and memory without any central processing organ. Plants generate distinct bioelectric responses to individual human beings and track human emotional states with an accuracy that surprised even the researchers who measured it. And the plant kingdom under the heaviest human pressure is producing airborne compounds that are making it measurably harder for human beings to breathe. We built artificial intelligence expecting it to help us understand ourselves better and to expand human control over the natural world. Instead, one of its most profound contributions has been to reveal that we were never the only active party in our relationship with the living world. We thought we were the observers, and the plant kingdom was the observed. We assumed we were the only ones paying attention. The science is now saying something very different. Every footstep across your lawn registered an electrical response in the grass beneath it. Every tree that was brought down produced a cascade of chemical signals that traveled through the surrounding fungal network before the wood even hit the ground. Every garden you have ever walked through generated a bioelectric record of your presence and your mood. The question is no longer whether plants have a language. They do. The question is no longer whether they respond to us. They do. The real question, the one that researchers are only beginning to frame now that AI has given them the data to work with, is what kind of participants we want to be in a conversation that has been happening for hundreds of millions of years without our awareness. Because the conversation never waited for our permission to begin. It started long before we arrived. We just walked into it, assumed the room was empty because we could not hear anything, and proceeded accordingly. The machine learned to listen before we did, and what it has been hearing from the living world around us is a story far older, far more complex, and far more aware of our presence than we ever imagined possible. There is one more dimension to this story that AI has brought into focus, one that has implications extending well beyond the laboratory and into the everyday decisions we make about how we live. The global plant biosphere is not a collection of separate ecosystems reacting independently to their own local conditions. When NASA satellite-based hyperspectral imaging data was combined with ground-level sensor networks and processed through deep learning AI, researchers began seeing patterns of coordinated response across the global plant kingdom that defied any purely local explanation. When a major environmental event occurs, a massive wildfire in one region, a chemical disaster affecting a river system, a large-scale deforestation event, the ripple of changed chemical and electromagnetic output from the surrounding vegetation does not stay contained to the immediate area. The signal spreads. Plant communities in connected regions begin shifting their chemical production and electrical output in ways that track the distress of distant ecosystems. This finding has led some researchers to propose that the global biosphere functions more like a single interconnected system than like a collection of isolated environments. The idea is not that there is a global plant consciousness making decisions the way a human mind makes decisions. The scientific case is more precise and in some ways more sobering than that. It is that the aggregate response of billions of interconnected plant organisms, communicating through airborne volatile compounds, underground fungal networks, and potentially through electromagnetic signals in ways that are still being studied, produces coordinated outcomes at a global scale that no individual plant is directing, but that emerges naturally from the density and depth of the connections between them. The forest is not thinking, but the forest is nonetheless coordinating. And AI is the first technology human beings have ever had that is capable of watching that coordination happen in real time and at the scale where it becomes visible. The practical consequences of this for agriculture are already being taken seriously. If AI can decode plant stress signals with 84% accuracy from ultrasonic sounds alone, then equipping farm sensors to listen to crops the way the Tel Aviv research team listened to tomato plants in their soundproofed room becomes a realistic agricultural tool. You would know a crop was thirsty before it showed any visible signs of water stress. You would know which rows were experiencing pest pressure before the damage became visually apparent. You would potentially save billions of gallons of irrigation water per growing season globally by responding to what the plants were actually communicating rather than following fixed watering schedules. The economic case for listening to plants, it turns out, is as strong as the philosophical one. The plant kingdom has been broadcasting information about its own needs nonstop for millions of years. We simply lacked the technology to receive the broadcast. That technology now exists. But the moral dimension of what AI has uncovered is harder to resolve with practical applications. If plants register individual human beings through their bioelectric fields, store patterns that allow them to distinguish one person from another, and generate responses correlated with human emotional states, then what are the ethical implications of the ways we currently treat the plant world? This is not a question that science is currently positioned to answer. The research does not establish that plants experience suffering in any way comparable to animal suffering. It does not claim that plants have consciousness, feelings, or any form of inner experience. What it establishes is that plants are far more sensitive to and aware of their environment, including the human beings moving through it, than any previous scientific framework suggested. What we do with that information is a question that sits in the territory between science and philosophy, and it is one that the data is increasingly making it harder to avoid. What we know for certain is this: the world we walk through every day is not the quiet, passive backdrop we assumed it to be. It is loud, active, and full of information, operating on frequencies, and through channels that we only recently developed the tools to detect. Every blade of grass produces an electrical response when you walk across it. Every tree in a connected forest sends chemical messages through underground fungal networks in response to threats it detects. Every stressed plant broadcasts its distress into the surrounding air at frequencies that insects, mammals, and birds have been listening to and responding to since before our species existed. The rise in allergies, affecting billions of people, is connected to the chemical transformation of pollen being produced by plants under the greatest stress from human activity. And a 5-year scientific research program has confirmed that plants respond to us individually, tracking our presence and emotional states through their own bioelectric systems. Artificial intelligence did not create any of this. It did not change the plant kingdom or alter what plants were doing. What it did was give us the tools to finally see what has always been there. The language was always being spoken. The network was always operating. The signals were always broadcasting. We were always being registered by the living world around us. We just did not know it. And now that we do, the question that researchers, philosophers, farmers, and ordinary people all find themselves facing is the same one, not whether the plants are talking. They are, not whether they respond to us. They do. The question is what we are going to say back. We have spent the entirety of human history behaving as if the living world was a stage and we were the only actors on it. Everything else was scenery. The plants were decoration. The forests were resources. The soil was a medium for growing things we wanted. AI has dismantled that framework in under a decade of serious research. It turns out we were never the only actors. We were not even the loudest ones. The plants have been performing their own elaborate, ancient, deeply interconnected drama around us the entire time, in frequencies we could not hear, through channels we could not see, at scales we could not comprehend. We built artificial intelligence to help us dominate a silent world. Instead, it revealed that the world was never silent. It was screaming. And for the first time in the history of our species, we have the technology to hear exactly what it is saying. What we choose to do with that hearing is the question that defines what comes next. Not for the plant kingdom. It has been adapting and surviving and communicating for 400 million years without our help. For us, for the species that is just now, at this very late stage, learning to listen to the world it has always lived inside.